panel, we are going to be digging into how we can build on recent policy progress to ramp up the fight against kleptocracy. As I just remarked, although we have made historic progress, there is still some way to go, and so we can't take our eye off that ball. But simply, what would it take to go from defanging to dismantling the UK's complicity with kleptocracy writ large? With us today, we have a fantastic panel. So we have Nigel Mills, who is Conservative MP for Amber Valley since 2010 and co-chair of the AKPG on anti-corruption and responsible tax. Nigel. On my left, we have John Penrose, who is Conservative MP for Western-super-Mare since 2005 and the Prime Minister's anti-corruption champion at the Home Office from 2017 to 2022. Oliver Bullough is an award-winning investigative journalist specialising in the area of corruption and author of Moneyland, Why Thieves and Crooks Now Rule the World and How to Take It Back. Susan Hawley, Dr. Susan Hawley, sorry, founder and executive director of Spotlight on Corruption, which highlights corruption and campaigns to improve the UK's legal systems. And finally, Dr. Maria Mitsaru, who is Research Fellow at the Centre for Finance and Security at RUSI, an expert on UK, EU and global financial crime, as well as policy dimension for illicit finance. So a fantastic array of expertise in the room. Each of our speakers is going to open with some remarks and then we'll open it up to discussion. So do please be preparing your questions in advance. But I'd like to start with Nigel.
Alex, thank you. Thank you for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here. Can I just say, John and I have to admit, we've somehow been offended by something, but there might be a vote at some point. So if you see us charging out here, kind of look, that's what's happening. I would certainly welcome, and I know those guys in PR, so get involved in this field, but more people working on this, merrier. I know you've got some real background that really help with this work. I feel slightly embarrassed on this panel, so I think I'm the least expert on here, so maybe I shouldn't speak for very long on what we can do. But so the thoughts I'd like to say that if we really want to move from the progress we've made in the last couple of years to really stamping this out, the sort of things we need to do, firstly, we actually, as a country, we really do want to do it. At times we talk about wanting to do it, and of course we do, but is it really a priority? If we really want to drive this, it has to be a clear government priority that is pushed down through the system, and everybody who is working in this field knows it is something that we do want to happen. And also often you get a bit of, but what about the health of the city, or what about our education investments, or what about how we attract we can't go too far on this, we might not be so attractive. We have to be very clear that rooting out corrupt money is not antipathetic to having a healthy, clean financial centre. I would argue those two are absolutely the two sides of the same coin. If you don't have form, you won't have them for very long. We really should do this. So if you do really want to do it, the second question is, do we have in place all the powers and the legislation, everything we need to do this? I would argue we quite possibly do now. You can always find the odd gap here and there, but I suspect the bigger problem we have is we've not actually effectively used all the powers that we do have. And I would probably urge the government, whoever it is after the election, to focus on actually properly implementing and using the powers they've taken, not just collecting more that they never actually use. And that's tricky for a politician, because we all have big high profile debates and say, look, we've introduced this new power, we've got an even bigger stick now, how great we are. And 5 years later you ask how many times it's been used, and they tried it once, didn't work very well. As we've seen against explaining also, it absolutely perfect, but are we actually using it? So that'll be the other thing. So the final question is, are we actually resourcing the authorities we've got to use the powers we're giving them sufficiently that we can really make a difference here? Because if you really want to deter this money from coming, it's not possible to prevent every pound. You need to deter, and the way you deter is that people think if they try and bring their money here, it may well get stopped. And even if they get it here, if we get found, somebody will find it through the various transparency processes we have. It could be hugely embarrassing for them. or the money will get taken from them because we can prove they should never have in the first place. So you need to put in place some risk and some jeopardy to say the UK is not a jurisdiction you want to put this in. At the moment, we're a very attractive jurisdiction because it's a great place to be. Once your money is here, it's safe. We don't just arbitrarily get people for no reason. We need to kind of make clear there's a lot of risk to it here. But for a lot of these people, you know, if they're discovered by their home countries to have several tens of millions or more of assets they can't explain, that could literally be a matter of life and death. But they don't want transparency, they don't want it to be known they've got hugely valuable London properties that they can't really explain how they've got. So if we can get a regime which has the right powers, has enforcement people with the resources they need to do this job, and we can show that we are really serious about enforcing it, and if you get it here, there's a fair chance you will get caught, you'll lose money and you'll lose that. Then I think we can't.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Of course, we completely understand that we need to jump at some point today. John, over to you.
Well, thank you, guys. And I firstly, can I say congratulations to IPPR, because I think this is a really good way to frame the debate, because we have this, you know, enviable position paying close to one of the top 2 or 3 wholesale money markets on the planet. Yes, it puts us in a position of enhanced risk. It also creates the most amazing opportunity to take the lead in solving this problem too. So kudos to you for having sort of framed it in this way, absolutely the right way, I think, to think about it. And I also echo what Nigel said about you know, none of us, I'm sure none of us in this room will, but others might have truck with the notion that you don't want to sort of be too rough on dirty money because it might harm that financial sector. Actually, as Nigel said, there's far more good money than bad, and you burnish your reputation by being as tight as possible and as clean as possible, and that enhances your ability to do business. So both of those things I'm totally with. I also echo his points about enforcement gap. It's all very well having powers, but we need to resource our law enforcement, particularly our financial law enforcement capabilities, very dramatically more. And there is, and that goes for everything from enablers, that's lawyers and accountants and bankers, etc., all the way on through. I think that's one of the things where, again, we can lead the way, perhaps by upgrading or something, and see the global sale in financial terms, at least in heads and stocks, by bringing forward successful cases. I think as well. And one of them is we've already been relatively forward leaning on beneficial ownership transparency. I think that is something which has a great deal further to run, and we need to make it ubiquitous and international, because there are huge network effects. The more I can follow the money around the world, the harder it is for anybody to hide it anywhere, including here. And so therefore that is something which is one of the most cost-effective mechanisms for many, many countries, and those network effects are really, really valuable. So we should certainly continue to be forward-leaning on that. The other one I also suggest, and it isn't always terribly popular in the UK, but I think it's sort of terribly fashionable in the UK, but I think it matters, is the proposals for an international anti-corruption court. It just strikes me that if we can't have something along those lines, the culture of impunity internationally will continue. And what we have at the moment, for example, international court of justice, international criminal court, those don't really cut it when it comes to corruption and health. They're bang on the nose. And I think that we could do a great deal by getting ourselves into the forefront, into the vanguard of people doing the thought leadership, creating the draft treaties that will be necessary and so forth. I think we could do a really great service in this area. We could. And the final point I make is, of course, corruption is a great deal broader than just money laundering and kleptocrats, and those are vitally important. They're international, but they aren't the only thing in town. There are a number of other things which this country needs to do domestically in order to make sure that we are sort of looking before eating our own cooking, choose your metaphor, and that's things like implementing some of the recommendations which have already been accepted in government policy, like the Warden Review, for example, getting ministers to sign deeds to make sure they've been abide by the recommendations of ACLA, and so on and so forth. There are a series of other things which are not so much to do with kleptocrats, but nonetheless will matter from the point of view of this country's broader reputation. And because we've already said we're going to do them, I can't see any reason why we shouldn't get on and talk about it.
I'm glad that we've got straight into the ideas for change as well. Oliver, over to you.
Thank you. Just drawing off of that, the title of this event is from defanging to dismantling. I thought I'd riff off that a little. I'm currently researching a book about the failure of the world's anti-money laundering architecture. Last week I was talking to a man called Sergei Grachov, who is a lawyer. He lives in Suffolk. He's lived in the UK since 2000. A serial entrepreneur. He describes himself had 11 companies. In August 2022, all 11 of his companies lost their bank accounts. They were given 2 months to find a new bank account by Barclays, all 11 at once. He's not a criminal. He's never been charged with a crime. I don't think there's any prospect that he will be charged with a crime. But he had, as a lawyer, when it was completely legal, done business for Alpha Bank, Russia's largest private bank. He is born in Moscow, and had done work for the owners of Alpha Bank, Piotr Allen and Mikhail Friedman, who both of them were sanctioned by the UK and other places in March 2022 after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So he was caught up in our effort to defang financial crime. 343,350 bank accounts were closed in 2022, many of whom were no doubt caught up because of the aftermath of the invasion of Ukraine in our efforts to defang financial crime. What I find particularly troubling about this is that I'm convinced, of having spoken to many people over the years, that just like Sergei Grachov, almost none of these people will be financial criminals. Instead, they have been caught up because the risk appetites of banks changed, and it became too risky for banks to wish to engage with those kind of crime. And the reason for that is that we have been, for a long time, outsourcing our battle against financial crime to banks, to financial institutions, and to other professional services, but primarily to financial institutions. And this is happening at a tremendous cost. Every year, according to UK Finance, UK industry spends £34.2 billion on compliance. That's 3/4 of the cost of our defence budget. Globally, the world spends $206 billion. That would be enough to end global thirst and hunger with $50 billion left over. And what's amazing about it is it's completely failing. We are not stopping financial crime. Why is that? Well, I think there's an instructive example was the operations run in the National Crime Agency called Operations Shaniko and Princeton back in 2017 to 18, which was an operation against money mules who were putting money into Santander and Barclays on behalf of sophisticated money laundering groups. And they found a loophole in the way ATMs work, you could put cash into them, and successfully those banks' compliance departments alerted the authorities to them, and they shut it down. But because we were essentially outsourcing the response to this to the banks, this wasn't ever really followed through, and no one really thought about what the money laundering gangs were doing next. Now, as any police officer will resourcing tackling financial crime. And this is exactly what happened with the two people on whose behalf Sergei Grachov was sanctioned. Piotr Allen and Mikhail Friedman, the Russian oligarchs sanctioned in March, have not stopped receiving banking services. They've just gone and somewhere. Now, we could investigate the origins of their fortunes when they first arrived in the UK, but instead we sanctioned them way too late and relied on bank compliance departments to do it for us, which essentially means we achieve nothing. Because the problem with relying on banks is when they do a risk-reward benefit of who they want to receive accounts from, is if someone is very rich, the reward is sufficient to take that risk. The risk is only not sufficient if someone like Sergei Grachov is not rich enough for it to be worth it as well. And that's why you can't rely on financial institutions to do the policing for you. Because for-profit policing never works, it cannot work. And that's sadly the system we have now. So we've called this from to dismantling, but I'm afraid defanging possibly is a little bit over.
Susan.
Thank you very much. And just a real testament what amazing cross-functional effort this has been actually in the UK to have this panel and the speakers you've got together today. Just picking up on the theme, John mentioned the enforcement gap. Oliver has said, come on, public sector, do your bit. Number one, are there three things, actually John made me think of a fourth thing, three things you've got to do. The first is we really have to tackle this enforcement gap. And I'm going to say the first thing in that it's not just about resources, it's structural. And really critical that we sort out the NCA, the National Crime Agency, because it is the nerve centre of fighting financial crime and kleptocracy. So it's got the FIU, Britain's FIU, Main Intelligence Unit, it's got the National Economic Crime Centre, it's got the International Corruption Unit, it's got the Combating Kleptocracy Cell, and it's got the International Anti-Corruption Coordination Centre. Two of those are funded. Actually, the most urgent and effective thing we could do is remove it from the civil service now, within the next few months. It would be a minor legislative fix. But just to give you, I mean, now basic recruitment of the NCA is completely stopped. You know, they threw more money at it. They couldn't recruit because of the civil service. They have to. The NCA doesn't have a pay structure that can actually attract the best talent in the UK. It estimated it needed 21 million. It's like, that's nothing, guys. It's like 2% of its budget to be able to bring its salary up to actually police levels and also attract staff. Instead, they were told that couldn't afford that, it's not possible. Instead, they spent 14 million on contingent temporary labour every year just to fill the vacancies because no one really wants to work there except the brilliant people who do. So that's the first thing. The second is supervision. Crazy situation, 22 supervisors, FATF pulled this out, and that's just for the legal and accountancy sectors alone. 22 supervisors, here we are coming up to a new FATF review, we've still got 22 supervisors for the legal and accountancy sectors. Their average fine when someone breaches money laundering regulations is £3,000. I don't come into tell you why that isn't enough. Not just those supervisors, HMRC average fine for people who sell luxury jewellery, luxury jets, estate agents, £5,000. So you know, there's a real issue in effectiveness and robust enforcement. And you know, we've just had one call for prosecution for money laundering ever. And one regulatory action against an individual after finding 17 banks for money laundering to £777 million. So supervision, we've got to do something about that. I wasn't going to say this, but I looked at the FT article, David Lammy's announcement today, and all these comments underneath, apart from the one that said hip hop in private schools, which was obviously not to run with, is political donations. And just to flag, you know, our colleagues at RUSI and Transparency International, you know, put out 13 key recommendations to tackle dirty money donations that were all recommended by independent bodies like CSPL, the Electoral Commission itself. You know, we're running into an election period with some very, very high risks in relation to party funding. And I'm going to say a very quick last story. I probably want to John said we've got to tackle corruption at home. It's absolutely critical, and actually one key thing we could do in that is have a actually effective corruption, domestic corruption laws. The EU is moving ahead. We're going to actually take on board all of the UN Convention Against Corruption's offences of abuse, corruption, trading in influence and illicit enrichment. We actually won't be able to provide the mutual legal assistance if they want to come to us because we don't have those offences in the UK. So we've got to tackle offensive corruption as well.
Thank you very much. And finally, over to Maria.
Thanks, Karis. It's always a little bit complicated being the last speaker because most of the things have already been said. So apologies. I will probably try to summarise a little bit more what has been said already by this panel. So I think where are we now? I think that first of all, we are much better off now than we were 2 years ago. Okay, the idea is yes, Russia invasion, full-scale invasion of Ukraine acted as a catalyzer for reform. It has been great so far. I mean, I remember when I joined RUSI almost 3 years ago, my then boss, she was like, oh, if you're going to call for economic crime in the UK, but do not worry, nothing ever happens. So if you don't finish your PhD, it's going to be fine. And then Russia invaded Ukraine, probably this Crimea had already happened. And I found myself, catapulted into this massive world of working, with MPs and ABDGs and the fantastic world of civil society, most of you are here present. It has been a collaborative effort. And I think, we need to think, like, just step back for a second and thinking, okay, how were we doing this? So first, the positives. We are so much better than we were before. Still a lot needs to be done. I think the second point, I think, definitely efforts, and again, it has been driven by civil service, civil society, APGs, and even private sector in a way. These efforts have been probably blocked a little bit by two things. On one side, in a way, yes, Russia's invasion of Ukraine acted as a catalyst, but also we kind of started adopting a sort of tunnel vision because we focused a lot on Russia. We focused on Russian kleptocracy, and we kind of dropped the crime on the side, which is still happening. We're still the money laundering capital of the world. So it's not just Russia, it's a lot of other dirty money that flows through the UK and through London specifically. So while some resources that have been directed towards responding to Russian aggression, to Russian dirty money are universal, I think that at the same time there's so much more that we should be looking at, that it's as I said, there are lots of kleptocracy, there are lots of criminals, financial criminals and money launderers in the UK that are acting. So the second issue, I think it's been exactly what Oliver said much better than I am. This is why I'm researching as a writer, which is we have prioritized compliance and Chinese, they say, so new legislation, new shiny tools, as I just said as well, or enforcement. So I think that definitely there has been some sounding block here, and we were looking for the headlines, rightly so, because we were riding away. But when the wave started to slow down and we're feeling that sort of economic crime fatigue, what do we do then? We need to keep pushing. We need to actually move towards the enforcement, which is not as fancy and shiny as it is. So what do we do? I wrote down everything that the panelists said. I think that there are two sides of this coin. One side is domestic and on the other side is international. The first one, you have to clean up your act at home. That means taking responsibility. There are so many times that I actually go to conferences, especially in countries of the so-called global south, where start talking and they see the name royal and they think that we're actually government. And like, oh, but what about the UK? You guys are not actually, taking ownership of the fact that you are facilitating. You are, the destination of the money that is stolen from our country. So we have to take responsibility. We have to actually clean up our act. How do we do it? It's already been said. Enforcement, definitely. I would love to see someone explain my orders, but I would just generally, be very happy if fast recovery rates would increase. And if I saw a little bit more of prosecutions, even civil recovery would be fun, but just give me something to work with. Otherwise, I feel like a broken record. The second one is dismantling the enabling architecture. Definitely, there are lots of enablers, supervision, as you mentioned, it needs to be, improving in many ways. I know that lots of work there is behind it, and we're going to support it. The final step, I think, is, yes, as I said, is ensuring operational capacity. That means resources. My manager yesterday mentioned that she would never apply for a senior position at the NEC, mostly because the salary is not even enough for a teacher. And imagine how much incomes are paid. So you do your math. So this is on the domestic side. And then I think there is the other part, which is the international aspect. And we need to absolutely show leadership. And I know I like to, I don't want to forget it, a speech that is going to be given later, but I think that, collecting with the other global financial centers that are part of this global money laundering architecture is fundamental. That also means, again, avoid the tunnel vision of kleptocracy. Look at other countries whose money is unfortunately coming up on UK shores. And finally, and this is more like a sort of right, support the fighting architecture. There are so many journalists, civil societies, different support groups. Most of the all the new shiny new legislation that we're seeing here, it wouldn't have probably happened without the support of these applications. So there needs to be a way to actually even promote that work. Now the topic is, I think, expect too much enterprise.
Fantastic, thank you very much, Maria. And actually, your comments touched on where I wanted to, what I wanted to ask and this next, which is what the barriers are to kind of faster progress in the next phase. We've heard resourcing as a very common theme for all of our panel, this tunnel vision idea, but also the kind of political compulsion to find the new and the shiny rather than maybe focusing on embedding what is already there. I wondered if our panelists could comment a little bit on kind of what they see as the barriers to be overcome next. John, I wondered if I messed up, but you.
I think as you summed it up beautifully by saying politicians, I'm afraid, and this is a sort of cross-party point, we're all just as guilty as each other of focusing on the new and the shiny. You make your name by inventing new rules and policies. You don't make your name by gritty implementation. And that's not always true of officials. There's a slightly different dynamic work there, but certainly for legislators, that's what it is. And also don't make your name by going to ask for extra money when money is very tight. And both those things are getting the absolute attention. So I'm afraid I think part of the problem is people like me in my profession. And we are going to have to, if we're going to be serious about this, which is front and centre, I think, with all our marks, we are going to have to unlearn that when it comes to this. And it's all very well to say we'll pass a third economic plan. Yeah, but you know what? That's less important than reforming the NCA, whatever it might be. So I think it will be a question of politically boring, but financially and reputationally and criminally effective implementation and enforcement.
That's it. Nigel, I wonder if you could pick up this from sourcing point. How can, I guess, those of us in the room who all have an interest in the gender be effective in making the case for better sourcing?
I think the case has been made effectively. I suppose the question is how do we get it up the priority list? There's only two ways: having a government in place that help refute it, or there's embarrassing people into doing this. I suppose the way of doing the latter is we want to see some outcomes. So, you know, you've got all these powers on the statute book, you've made all these promises, and the investigations are ongoing, how many charges have been brought, how much money have been recovered, how much money have been implemented. If the answer to all these questions keep coming back with very low numbers, so I think that's one of the things that motivating people to put some more resources in place, which isn't working. But this is a challenge. I suppose the problem is political focus moves on. We saw great steps in 2016 in the chemicals to go to summit announced lots of new ideas, but to go in abortion registers, which brings that out of office a few weeks later. We didn't see their registers for almost until Russia invaded Ukraine. The challenge we will have is how do we keep this issue front and centre if it remains that war, which is a real move to different problems, into different priorities. Those of us who care about this, that's what we need to make sure benefits.
So I can see you nodding along. Would you agree with
that? Yes. I think it is really tricky because I'm thinking, you know, just this week, you know, I've heard some stats about actually some of the successes that happen when you really put a lot of effort. So if you take the fraud sphere, you know, fraud prosecutions are up 9%, you know, fraud statistics are down 17%. You know, actually there's been a huge effort to really prioritise fraud. And it worked, you know, or it's working. It's not working as well as we need it to. It might feel like that is working to the public, but actually, you know, when you have that system prioritization, it does really work. I think that Nigel's talked about how do you keep this really salient, and I think it is probably important that, you know, Maria's talked about it, that we move beyond just focusing on Russia and Russian kleptocracy. I think we need to start thinking about it not just as a national security threat and that hostile states, but moving back to actually the impact on development and the huge costs this has. There's some extraordinary stats out there, you know, countries that, you know, have the most illicit financial flows, leaving them 58% less spending on education, 40% less on health. You know, we need to get back to, actually they sound quite boring, but the sustainable development goals with quite an ambitious global commitment. So I think, you know, we've been so focused on national security, hostile states, but actually we need to find a framework about our responsibility to the whole world, actually. So I think that's important. Can I just think one thing, UWOs, I'm going to be contentious. No, we don't need UWOs. They're only invested tool, they don't get the reasons, we need more civil recovery. And I think it's a really good example of a shiny new tool that actually law enforcement have found that useful, but they have found other tools which weren't very sexy, like the cat freezing orders, incredibly useful. So there is something in there around political narrative, you know, and how distracting the new shiny stuff can be actually, you know, the end goal.
Although you struck a slightly less optimistic tone than some of the other panelists. On this point about turning away from a compliance approach, what do you think the major barriers are to stopping this from being adopted?
Well, the good thing about compliance from a public sector perspective is that someone has to pay for it. And, you know, it's always easy to tell other people to spend. You know, it feels, you know, talking about showing a new thing, it feels like someone who knows they need to get fit. And they know that the way to get fit is to do a lot of exercise. But the problem with doing exercise is it's embarrassing and hard work and it takes time, and, you know, the credit probably won't come for months, if that. So instead you buy yourself a new piece of exercise equipment. You've now got a gym with a elliptical and a rowing machine and a bike machine and a treadmill and all this stuff. You never used any of them, but every time you buy one, you get a headline of FT. And I'm afraid I saw that piece this morning and my heart sank. I said, oh no, not an anti-corruption court. We have courts. You know, we're not using them, but they exist already. You know, Sue mentioned fraud. There's something that there has been a degree of success in fraud. One form of fraud that we used to talk about all the time 15, 20 years ago was carousel fraud. Huge fraud, billions of pounds a year of money being stolen from public coffers by enterprising fraudsters shipping mobile phones, computer chips, and other small, high-value objects in and out of the EU states. Who talks about that anymore? The reason no one talks about it anymore is the problem has essentially been solved. And it wasn't solved by a new anti-corruption court, and it wasn't solved by understand what this. It was solved by really, really hard work by HMRC, by the Foreign Office that did a lot of work with our EU partners, because that's what we like, and so on. And it was hard work, and it was them getting on the track and just banging it in the miles. And now the reason we don't talk about carousel fraud is, I mean, it's under control. And I think that we could see everything like that. And sadly, the problem is that no one gives anyone credit for carousel fraud because everyone's forgotten it even existed in the first place, and what even was it?
So perhaps some of us room into acknowledge more credit for hard work.
Well, I mean, yeah, when it happens, yeah.
Of course. Maria, is there anything you wanted to add on the barriers?
No, I mean, I completely agree. I think that, again, as I said, we are so much better off than we were. I think that credit needs to be given to. Again, I always recognize the word of civil service here, because it, together with us from the side, you know, providing the kind of research and advocacy, I think that there has been that sort of, you know, it's difficult to be working on something and then something happens in government and you find yourself with a new prime minister or a new government again, and you have to start all over. So just managing to bring to the end, you know, the theories of like legislative changes that we serve, I think it's already like deserve around our vote. Now the other side is again, ensuring enforcement, and for instance online, I'm speaking with borders or all these kind of things. I completely agree. You know, there has been this moment where it was politicized too much, and then because it failed so miserably, and was also, you know, the narrative around it was a disaster. I would say there was this sort of PTSD that they were suffering from that failure, and now we're not going to see them anymore, even as an investigative tool, even if we even put them in the Economic Crime Act. So why would it be even bother thinking about reforming something that we know that it's probably not going to solve the problem? So I just think that it's, you know, as I said, it's good to have a political narrative. Russia invading Ukraine did more than probably my boss don't keep me banging about for about 10 years or how long it's working in the field. But at the same time, there is this sort of underground work that it's not as shiny, that we need to kind of pay a little bit more attention. And finally, what Sue said about development, I completely agree. it's the whole thing, you know, we tend to forget that there is a starting point where this money is leaving and it's affecting everybody's life. And you see it, and I find it very difficult whenever I go actually to these countries and I talk about financial action task force recommendations and how you can implement it. And you see it actually saying, okay, yes, but money is leaving this country, it's coming to the UK, because I have a weird accent, they don't know where I'm from. And so they think it's, what are you going to do about it? And they can apply all the Pakistanis in the world, but it's us that have to give the money back to then use them actually development aid. So I do think that this part of the victims as well and the origin country is so much important, much more important than we actually address.
Thank you. So I want to open up questions to the floor. We have a roving mic, Holly, and I'll take a few questions over to mine. Could I see some hands that would like to come in? And I'll try to get to everybody. So there's one here.
Yeah, touching on Maria's books, do you think the elision of the kind of geopolitical sanctions framework, you know, whether it's against Russia, China, Iran, and then the, you know, more directed money laundering corruption enforcement risks just undermining the latter? Because people, particularly in the global south, will see, you know, money laundering enforcement as a political act, because the rhetoric is the same for the sanction regime and the money laundering enforcement.
Thank you. And I forgot to ask, could you just say your name and where you're from?
James, I'm a student.
Great. And the gentleman at the back.
Thanks, David Mustan, the Jockey Trust. Picking up Oliver's thanks to post offices analogy, if we clean up the UK, won't this just result in displacement and all the corrupt money will go somewhere else? Or is the strategy that first we clean our own act up and then we'll have a platform to clean up the rest of the world? And just a quick second one, the UK, it says on the title, does that include overseas territories or not?
And then over here. Sorry, everybody.
Hi, I'm PK, organization called Uncheck UK. And given it's an election year, I thought I might challenge the idea that this agenda is pretty boring. We do a lot of focus grouping on one thing that we know is very popular, is enforcement. People really do want heads and spikes. People want to see accountability, and people want to see, you know, really active evidence that, you know, the government is taking these agendas seriously. It has had huge cut through. And conversely, I think the political damage of the suspicion that corruption is becoming very insidious in the UK domestically is there's a huge political consequences, I think, both for political parties, but I think more widely for our democratic health. So just to, I think, challenge a bit the idea that this is not politically sexy would be really important.
Can I ask you a question, Phoebe? Just given that's based on your research, which is what would kind of give, you know, what people see, what would give them confidence that being done?
I mean, the things that we talk to people about is things like polluter pays. The idea that if you go out there and actually cause harm knowingly, you should face consequences. That has cut through across all of that. It doesn't matter if they be towards Conservatives or Labour. You know, real sense that these things really matter and that people will see evidence that it can be done.
Great. I'm going to take one more and one other question.
Great, thank you. Tim Douglas from Property Mark. We're a professional regulatory body for property agents. And there will be some people in the room who know what I'm going to ask. I really resonate with what Oliver was saying and focus on enablers. From property market, property sector's point of view, outside of Scotland, Wales, for letting agents, there's no minimum qualification or licensing requirements to operate. And it is great that in Nigel Mills in the APG's manifesto, there was a spotlight on lowering the threshold for letting agents. If you're a letting agent dealing in monthly rents of €2,000 or more, you have to register for AML supervision. 1,000 registrations of letting agent for HMRC, where there's 19,000 letting agents in England alone. So I think there's a lot of talk about high-level enforcement, but all of this is retrospective. Why aren't we licensing and qualifying the enablers to start putting it at the front door? We need that government decided to do it.
Great, so we have some quite tricky questions there. We have one on whether the addition of geopolitical sanctions, money laundering, undermines the latter. We have another on the overseas territories within the definition of the UK, but also whether there's a risk of displacement. We have the point from Phoebe about whether this actually is quite politically salient and more so than we're giving it credit for. And then finally, that question about licensing and enablers. Nigel, could I start with you perhaps, and perhaps just pick up this the kind of political question, that's politically boring and interesting.
So those of us who spent a fair amount of time on this hope it's going to be popular with our constituents. I have to tell you, there's not much science meeting my email inbox on this topic, so I'm not sure it's cutting through. I suppose there's a danger if you ask people, question, is this important, should we do more? And you'll say yes, as to whether it's a priority for most of my constituents, something I doubt. What I would say though is people really hate tax evasion, tax avoidance, they hate rich people getting away with things. There's a lot of concern about developments around the world and how we can be better at that. So I think depending on how you phrase the question, I mean, you're getting a concern on this as to whether there's political excitement around measures in tackling violent crime in this nuanced way. I'm not so sure on that. I think it probably is fair to say that if I was in the global south, I would say, well, you've ignored for years what's having every money involved and you've let it get into the UK without too much concern. As soon as Russia does something that you don't like, you suddenly start taking it seriously. But I suppose the flip side of that is, it's better that it's happened than we've taken these powers and we're now taking it more seriously than we weren't. And hopefully, we can move this past Russia and it's kind of like an entrenched part of our system rather than we can forget all about it if this war is ever over. Any more you want to talk about? Overseas territories, absolutely, we need to make sure that we're not having our rules undermined by parts of the UK or parts people certainly think of the UK. I think having David Cameron and Andrew Mitchell in the Foreign Office has been very positive in terms of getting transparent registers a little higher up the agenda. And I think we certainly suspected that some of their predecessors were a bit more agreeing with the territories that were reluctant and forcing them in that situation. In terms of if we fix ourselves and move somewhere else, well, I mean, clearly people will try. If we really got the UK clean and all our overseas territories clean, you start to run out actually of very attractive, safe places for all to put their money. The more you can move them into marginal territories where they may get it stolen or they may have things happen to them, the harder and harder this becomes. And I think if we have set an example, we can try and drive this out of the respectable developing world. That at least is significant progress in making that. But I suspect there is no way of stopping every tin pot dictator in every African country wanting to rob his country blind and get some assets somewhere. But the harder we can make it, the less of it we'll see.
Thank you. Oliver, do you think that your disclosure argument applies to countries?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it does. We've seen that after March 2022 and the big wave of sanctions, a lot of money then was to Turkey and to Dubai and other places, but I don't think that's a reason not to do anything. I don't live in London. I don't know, many people who live in London maybe London rate, how the raise in London is. There's a reason all the rich people want to come here, right? Because it's really nice. It's got everything you need in one city. It's got a great time zone. The language is widely spoken. It's got a very attractive still tax code and so on, very biblical lawyers. This is a great place to be rich. And there are reasons people want to come here. No one else does what we do. No one, I mean, you know, I wrote a book about this as well. There's a reason it's about the UK. It's because no one else does what we do. So if we stop people coming here, where else are they going to go? That's as fun as London. Yes, they can go to Dubai, by all means, with my blessing, enjoy it. But it's, you know, there is a reason people want to come here, and it will be an incentive. And so, no, it's not an argument. If other people don't do it, we shouldn't do it. And B, if we do it, it will actually help drive up standards everywhere, because we are one of the great. So that's you know, a really important person.
I agree. Maria, maybe the first question about geopolitical sanctions and money laundering, and whether the focus on the geopolitical undermines second. Could you please that one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, you know, I think, Chris, I'm going to use the example that always in a lot of people's mind, with the whole idea of should we seize the assets, you know, that are owned by Russian oligarchs, etc. Lots of individuals who are currently sanctioned under Russian sanctions, they are not, in my mind, probably, Oliver said, like, they do not probably be ever prosecuted for financial crimes. So the risk is you conflate these two issues and you lose the attention on actually going after the bad guys. And, you know, there is one role for sanctions in my head and one role for prosecuting and for criminal justice. With this said, we are seeing now that these two conversations are going more and more together hand in hand. So I suppose it's more a matter of balancing the act rather than just excluding one because of the other or vice versa. Can I comment on the other points? I mean, on enforcement, I agree. I don't think that people think that enforcement is boring. I think that what leads to enforcement, which in many cases is resourcing, for instance, that is something that is not going to catch the attention of potentially most of the journalists in the room. So it's more the steps that take you to actually catch the criminal rather than, you know, the criminal itself, or the prosecution of sentencing or a big fine. You know, I remember that there was a £1 billion seizure of crypto. I mean, that made the headlines because it was £1 billion. So there you go. And finally, on the displacement of risk, I think that this was something that I tried to kind of say in my opening remarks. There's definitely something, you know, there can be as many kleptocracies as there are countries in the world, or even non-state, like non-recognized states. But there are going to be fewer financial centers, I think. So you have to understand, as a global financial center, if you're going to have offset, there's going to be some risk, right? So why don't you actually reach out to all the other centers that have some characteristics that are similar to you? So I would favor this sort of international dialogue. You know, let's not exclude the UAE. Even if, you know, at this point we'll see mostly as a facilitator, why don't you actually reach out and try to find ways to prevent this huge displacement from the UK to the UAE or to Turkey, whatever other place? Because you know that there needs to be some requirements for being global financial centers, like not everybody can do it. So you can't contain it if you try.
Sue, could you pick up this point about licensing and whether that's a more effective approach than retrospective improvement?
Yeah, it is a really good point, prevention point, and I think you've highlighted some of the gaps. Letting agents, as company developers, there are other quite big gaps in our private schools. You know, to give an example, I mean, there's certainly one African former leader who is alleged to have billions and billions from her country, who lives in Dubai, but whose children still are at private school in the UK, despite them being subject to uniform just. So I think there are all sorts of gaps which are part of the problem and need to be addressed, which is a slightly different point from your point about licensing. I think that prevention piece it also cuts to, I know Phoebe mentioned like the polluter pays principle, where polluters knowingly engage in something. I think the problem with the UK is it's that knowingly. It's like the system, you know, allows a lot of stuff. So how do you create, whether it's licensing, training, real engagement with high-risk sectors, and how does it happen effectively? I mean, there's a really interesting initiative going on at the moment with the Institute of Business Ethics to try and engage the legal sector, which has generally been quite in denial that it has any kind of problem, generally feels it shouldn't have to do anything about it. sorry, any lawyers in the room. But I think, you know, it is an important part of the picture, and it is part of what supervisors should be doing. But supervisors are limited by using their regulated population. So it comes back to the original point, which is, you know, how do we get to the sectors which actually aren't actually regulated for money laundering, and make sure that they also don't create loopholes and make the UK a little bit silly.
Thank you. And at 3:30 we have a whole panel which is going to consider overseas territories, but even so, John, I wondered if you wanted to comment on that question.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer to the question, should they be excluded? No, absolutely flipping not. Absolutely no way. And you know, Paul was quite right to say, you know, if we, in fact, several rules, if we can marginalise the dirty money into a series of increasingly iffy alternative jurisdictions, by creating the network effects I was talking about earlier on, then at that point, the jeopardy or risk associated with dirty money goes up, and that is good. It's good for our reputation, it's good for the reputation of the developed global body world. The bit that I just want to follow up on a little bit, if I could, is this point about the overlap between this and sanctions, because sanctions are inevitably a sort of political sparked act. And one of the reasons why I would respectfully disagree with Oliver is about the point about this international anti-corruption court, because I think we need something which ends impunity on a non-political basis. And that requires decisions to be taken away from politicians and into the hands of people who are politically at arm's length, who are investigators, who are judicial as well. And that's why I'm in favour, and even I take on this can't just be another nice little political, you know, shiny toy to reduce. It has to be part of the enforcement gap, which we were talking about beforehand. It has to be part of ending this idea of international impunity, which currently, I'm afraid, the sanctions regime is an expression of, because you know, there are lots and lots of people out there who well should be sanctioned if we were following those criteria universally and internationally, and who aren't, and there's no prospect of them becoming so either in this country or elsewhere. And the only way I can think of for doing that is to find a non-political route. That's why I think that the International Anti-Corruption Court should have legs. And while Oliver is also right to say that carousel fraud is a really good example about something where a problem was solved. It was solved because all sides, all the countries involved in that carousel fraud had something to lose and wanted to pursue it and cooperated with each other. The point about international impunity when you're dealing with a country that's run by a kleptocratic dictator is their country won't cooperate. So you've got to have something else that works as well. It's an and, not an or, is my point. But I think at that point, that starts to do with some of these issues about the inherently political nature of sanctions, quite apart from the fact that sanctions only freeze and they don't second straight assets up.
Oliver, I think you want to comment on the
So I know I just wanted to say on our overseas territories, that if we are going to stop our overseas territories being involved in moving dirty money, we need to ask the question of why they moved it in the first place. The Cayman Islands, before it became a financial centre, was a place that specialised in turtle fishery. It had a very small population, and the reason it's not part of Jamaica now is Jamaica didn't want it. We turned it into a financial centre because we wanted it to be able to pay us anyway. The same is true of Anguilla, the same is true of the British Virgin Islands, the same is true of Gibraltar. The same is true of the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man. If we're going to stop them doing this, we need to give them something. We saw after the Hodge-Mitchell Amendment, which was fantastic to impose transparency on the overseas territories, because that was done as a backbenching, there was no government strategy around that. And I think it's no coincidence that we've seen increasing presence of the cartels in our Caribbean territories since then, because the number of companies being created in those places, particularly the BVI, has gone down, and there are people in those islands looking for other ways to make a living. There needs to be some form of just transition to help them move away from that way of making a living, if we want it to cement itself and become a correct way of getting about things.
I'm going to take another round of questions before we close. So it's small hands. So the lady at the front here.
Eva Van from the International Lawyers Project. We're a charity that provides pro bono lawyers to anti-corruption journalists and activists and parliamentarians anywhere in the world. We're working with a Nigerian NGO, and they have put together quite a comprehensive dossier on the number of Nigerian senators who own real estate in the UK. And they've gone carefully through Companies House, the land registry. It's not sophisticated money laundering. In most cases, the beneficial ownership is there direct. They've been working with the anti-corruption agency in Nigeria. They've briefed the NCA attaché, the High Commission in Nigeria, who was very enthusiastic about it, took it to his superiors in the NCA in the UK. The Nigerian anti-corruption head has tried to make way, and it's just getting blocked. I won't waste your time by asking what should be done. But particularly John Penrose, Nigel Mills, we can be as creative as we need to be. What works? Could we write letters to some people or ask to meet some people to get this through? We specialize in this, and it seems like a very comprehensive dossier with very clear money laundering by these Nigerian senators.
Thank you.
My name's John Henshaw from the University of Exeter. Because you explained wealth orders came in, I thought I'd just go back to that, not on the question of whether they should be replied, but the lessons they may give to us from the use of these kind of freezing tools. My colleagues and I put together a large report at the time 2 years ago, discussing the failure, but three things really briefly. Firstly, the problem with accepting evidence from a foreign court with respect to a person who is part of the political elite of that country. And the incumbency advantage that comes from that. So it means our laws are effectively going to be targeted at exiles, not incumbents. Secondly, the difficulty of proving a predicate crime, which raises the question of possibility whether participation, membership in a network of kleptocracy could itself be designated a crime, which you're starting to see in some parts of the world. And thirdly, the need for expert witness testimony to establish that indeed an individual is part of a kleptocratic regime. And I having effectively offered that pro bono to the NCA at the time through intermediaries, I really don't understand why, if you get someone who actually knows the political economic context of the person in question, to stand up and say, this person is fully part of that kleptocratic regime and that's how they made their money, how that isn't taken more seriously than the evidence provided by that government of which they are a part. So it'd just be really interesting to hear you reflect on that, not as we sort of reviving EWOs, but those different areas, because if we don't fix those problems, we're still only going to be capturing the money from exiles and people who've fallen out of favour, it seems to me. So yeah, just like to think more speed on.
Great, thank you. And then one just here.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth Mystery, independent journalist. With great respect and former post holder, should we be having another anti-corruption champion?
That was a good one. I will look at the back there.
Michael there, the only sort of perhaps more simplistic question. Is there anything to be done at the law firms enabling some of the corrupt people and money launderers and kleptocrats in London? I think one of the panelists mentioned it as proposal just now. Is that just wishful thinking?
I can take one more question. I'm hesitating because Holly's going to have to run around to the other side. Just at the front here. Should we go for it's just coming the microphone.
I'll go as a final lawyer specialising in the anti-corruption field. I want to go back to the point that Susan Hawley touched on earlier, that our anti-corruption efforts should be repurposed away from simply a question of national security and more towards development. In this respect, I feel that we've actually gone backwards, because when we had a separate department for international development, there was within it a very effective anti-corruption unit, which did a lot of excellent work, mainly in Commonwealth countries, helping them to recover money and setting up a more effective anti-corruption infrastructure within their own country, with the full cooperation of the countries concerned. I don't know how much that cost, but I can guarantee you that its efforts yielded much more, far times more than it cost. Is there any possibility of ever going back to a situation where we are more active in the anti-corruption field internationally in that sort of way?
Great, thank you. So we have 10 minutes left in this session. We have 5 speakers, so I'm going to ask each of our speakers to be brief and perhaps start with some any concluding remarks that you want to give as well. Maria, perhaps I could start with you. You don't have to answer every question.
No, sure. I mean, I will try to answer quite quickly to the ones that I managed to pick. Anti-corruption champion, absolutely. How about an economic crime commissioner potentially? Some other people talked about a minister, like somebody who would be, you know, responsible and accountable. Absolutely, why not? On the international anti-corruption, I mean, definitely, yes, the more the merrier. I'd say that the SOCMED leads, you know, they're already doing quite a very good job. I think they're illicit finance leads. They are, at least for us, a point of reference and have started. Obviously, there are not as many, and this brings me back to the issue of resources, doesn't it? So I feel, again, as I said, a broken record. On unexplainable borders, absolutely. I don't think that, you know, they are not mutually exclusive, the kind of discussions that we've been having, you know, just like sanctions and going after crime, the same goes for enforcement and resourcing and coming up with new legislative, creative ideas. I, for once, have the first one, literally wrote a paper on what kind of new offence can we come up with to go after the proceeds of kleptocracy. And again, the University of Birmingham and Socrates program was really keen on finding new ideas. So I think that, again, we are trying to, the kind of conversations that we need to have, we cannot go as I'm going to repeat myself, the tunnel vision of looking exclusively at one issue as it can be solved by some sort of magic wand. It doesn't exist. You have to look at the broader framework. And because it's a complex issue and it's a transnational issue, we require little bits coming from literally everywhere. Any bit can help. So I'd say, yes, absolutely, let's go for it, but also let's focus on what is missing, which in this case is probably, yeah, more people and more time.
Great. Oliver.
Yeah, thanks. I suppose it'd just be good to try and just go back to why we want to do this. What's the point of fighting kleptocracy? I mean, there's a reason why that effort was funded out of DFID, which is that kleptocracy makes everything worse. It's a force multiplier. Dictators, terrorists, cartels, it's disease, poverty, misery, and so on. That's why it's worth tackling. So many of the questions we've had, great questions from me, but yeah, really interesting to look at that. And from John and so on, it's about difficulties of dealing with dirty money once it's here. You know, how do you prove that a Nigerian senator illegally bought some property? You know, why is it that a UWO doesn't work, and what would work? Well, what would work would be just stopping the money from coming here in the first place. It is much easier to stop people getting into a castle than it is to find them once they're in the castle. And I think that that's the lesson that we keep, in a way, forgetting, because it feels morally grubby to say, well, yes, the money's here, we can't really prioritize that, we need to prioritize fighting new stolen money. But actually, if we could stop more money being stolen, or more stolen money from coming in, those problems that kleptocracy is causing, which is the reason for doing this, would become less. And I think that needs to be the priority. So, you know, yes, we need to think about UWOs, and yes, we need to think about all sorts of things. But to my mind, the most important thing is to, again, prioritize law enforcement agencies so they can go after the people who are doing this right now, not the people who are doing it 20 years ago. Because with the best will in the world, those cases take forever. Even in the United States, the case of Pavlo Bazarenko, former Prime Minister of Ukraine in the 1990s, arrested, convicted, and let out of prison for corruption in the US after he wisely went down to be far from power. They still haven't managed to confiscate his money. It takes a long time. It is better, more bang for your buck to go after it. What's happening right now, rather than what in the past.
John, over to you, if you do have thoughts on this and what to do about the enablers.
I'm having disagreed with Oliver on my last reply, I'm going to strongly agree with him on this one, because this point about the enforcement gap, I think we've all mentioned it, I'm just opening comments, I think it directly goes to both the point about enablers and law firms, but also the other professional enablers, and also to the question of Nigerian senators, and in fact dozens of other people from dozens of other countries as well, which is we've got, we're strike while the iron is hot, while the evidence trail is still there, and do it now and resource it properly. I will bet anybody in this room that it can be self-financing if we do it right, because the amount of money that's out there. But do it we absolutely have to. We are, a couple of you call us the capital of this sort of stuff in the world, but we're one of the capital. Let's not forget New York and Delaware, for example, as well. But if we can start to become a really hostile place for dirty money, then PR's excellent title for this entire half day could become true. I would be really proud to live in a country like that.
Nigel, could you pick up this question about what works to get attention for a dossier like the one described as a proposal once?
I mean, we have occasionally had groups come and mediate a party parliamentary group and present this evidence, and then we forward it to agencies. The challenge is we can't direct them and they won't give us any feedback, but if you've got a convincing dossier, you take them seriously, we certainly act as a conduit. It will be the end of that involvement. Suddenly, we just don't have a system and get feedback unless something happens in the courts, I suppose. But it is quite frustrating when we see these cases. We think we decide we want to tackle this, we've got the powers in place, and then what looks like a compelling case just isn't going anywhere. Just feel like we're kind of wasting our time a bit, so we're happy to do anything to get in touch. I think it's playing well for us. Maybe I'm slightly naive. There is a risk when governments try and do things that go against the grain, that the system then won't play along with it. When you have a system of innocent until proven guilty, you try and put in place a power that is guilty and then you can prove that innocence, and then you don't resource it and prepare and be very careful what you can't be too surprised when the court comes. And it doesn't quite work. So I think that's why I think the whole system has to be very clear that there's very good reason why we want to do this, and we are very serious and we will keep doing it, and we'll drive it for those what's happening, not just have one go and then it doesn't work and we back off and people can come to the right answer. Law firm enabling. I was an accountant once, money laundering checks were really nightmares. Because you knew that they were genuinely pointless, because you knew this business model, you knew this individual model. It was just paper chase and the most junior person had to do it, and there was a form and you knew which boxes to tick, and then you got someone to sign it, and then that was the end of that process was done. And that's all fine if you get it wrong, and you find that someone's done it, someone you should never have done it with you, or handbrake, so to speak. The important thing on that kind of process is it has to be there and it always has to be there, and there has to be real enforcement and real sanctions when something goes wrong, so it doesn't just slip into this tick box mentality of let's not look too close, it might be clearly it will never get caught. Then you have to really believe you get caught if you go wrong, and there's a big sanction that you don't want. But also you want this to be proportionate, so you're not asking people to do thousands of pointless pieces of work, which then mean when the enforcement comes along, and behaving that they don't do it properly. So it's just trying to get the balance right. And finally, I'm dashing off here, the International Select Committee, which I'm supposed to be was doing. There was a real problem for a couple of years at least with a strategy that basically stopped funding all civil society in key territories around the world. We used to say we didn't want to do it, but it value to do something else. And that was effectively where a lot of the anti-corruption stuff was sat, so basically got decriminalised. The white paper that Andrew Mitchell has produced put quite a lot of that back in. He was a former co-chair of the Party for Anti-Corruption. He is committed to this. I think we have learned at least some of the lessons of that couple of years of Mr. Newton on that, actually if we can help these countries protect their own resources, that is probably a much more efficient way of giving them generally quite a small amount of money these days. So I would agree with you, we got that wrong. It was a terrible mistake not to press the bill on that. We should hopefully it's now fixed.
And finally, Sue.
Yes, so yeah, agree, lots of brilliant questions. I mean, just a kind of rough statistic. So the UK International Corruption Unit, which investigates all dodgy money from politically exposed people in the UK, it receives about 20 cases a week. It has resources to investigate 20 a year. We're talking about the very small percentage that. So when it receives a dossier of Nigerian properties, it's going to look at that and go, can we do that? Yeah, we've got resources. Is it priority? You know, and it's not. We just don't have the resources to do it. So I think, you know, we've heard the resourcing issue. We have to win the argument that we have to invest. And as John said, it will bring a return, not just to the law enforcement agencies, but to the Treasury, but more broadly to actually the developing countries where, you know, it prevents the happening again. So, and there are mechanisms for doing that. You know, reinvesting far more assets that the law enforcement agencies already bring in, or their fines. I don't need to repeat, probably most people we know the statistic about how much the serious fraud office brings in from foreign bribery cases that goes straight to the Treasury. So we do need to win that argument and get more reinvestment back into law enforcement agencies. And there's a separate issue that John raised, which is about foreign evidence and how foreign evidence is dealt with in courts, which is really, really thorny. And you know, we see that all the time. Law enforcement agencies go, will we get any cooperation? No, we won't. Ditch everything. Literally, that's it. So I think I don't know how to tackle that. I mean, when I came with a proper session, that'd be great. Just, but I think there is a real kind of stepping up that the UK can do on the development side. And you mentioned the white paper, Nigel and Andrew Mitchell's increasing rhetoric. I think there was a real retreat by the UK from that space, and we do have to, particularly to stop that collision between sanctions evasion and money laundering. We have to, you know, there's a real opportunity in the UK to re-inhabit that space because we did it well, actually, you know, and we can do it well again. Okay, money is going to be an issue. Very finally, it is a global problem. You know, we do have to, kind of, as Amelia said, bring in the, you know, the jurisdictions that don't want them doing, like we do in Dubai. We need to find the allies, you know, and that's the way that we get beyond the geopolitical tensions that are causing quite a lockdown, actually, getting international consensus.
Fantastic. Well, we're a couple of minutes over, apologies, but we now have a bit of a break, and there is coffee and drinks down the stairs. We're going to be back here at 3:30 for the next panel where my colleague Park will be hosting. But for now, please join me in thanking our excellent panel.